Their voices dropped, and I strained to hear. "She is a witch," whispered Lady Wingfield. "The little extra finger that she goes to such lengths to conceal, that surely is a sign. I myself believe that she has put a spell on King Henry." That voice belonged to Lady Rochford. My heart beat faster as I listened, and my anger mounted. Blood pounded in my temples, and my mouth was dry as dust. And my hands were shaking. How dare they speak of me like this? I wanted to shout at them. One day, I shall be queen above you all. Many people are familiar with Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen of England. However, not nearly as many are familiar with her mother, Anne Boleyn. Doomed Queen Anne by Carolyn Meyer tells the true story of Anne's rise to power and her eventual downfall. My father, Thomas Boleyn, brought word that he had secured for me a position at Queen Catherine's court. The news that I was going to court, even one as dull as I predicted Queen Catherine's likely to be, cheered me. I wrote to my good friend excitedly, "I shall often be in the presence of our magnificent king." The first important event after my arrival at the court of Henry VIII was the celebration of Candlemas on the 2nd of February. King Henry was all anyone could wish for. I could scarcely take my eyes from him. He seemed, at the age of 31, almost godlike, the tallest man in the court, the most vigorous and forceful of manner, and the most splendid in his person. King Henry made every man around him seem insignificant in comparison. Next to him sat his wife, Queen Catherine, a much older woman whose looks had long since faded. She presented an unfortunate contrast to her husband. That night I lay awake, unable to clear my mind of the vision of the magnificent King Henry, and wondering how I might attract his notice. Weeks passed. Then, one midsummer evening, as I dined in the maids' chambers, only half listening to their ceaseless chatter, a royal page appeared. The maids fell silent as the boy delivered to me a note written in French. It requested that I come at once. It was signed Henricus Rex, Henry the King, and bore the king's seal. He wanted me now. I had no opportunity to change my gown, arrange my hair, or do any of the things which a lady might want to do in preparation for such an interview. No time to become unnerved by this new course I sensed my life was about to take. I followed the young page, not to the king's privy chamber as I had expected, but to an even more private chamber beyond it. The chamber was empty, save for the king and I. Beyond the open door to a bedchamber, I glimpsed an immense bed with thick mattresses and curtains of blue velvet trimmed with gold. King Henry leaned toward me, his blue eyes lively, his smile winning. Lady Anne. He breathed my name almost as if it were a sigh. "Your Majesty," I said, kneeling. I allowed his gaze to wander over me from head to foot. "You do please me greatly," he said. "It pleases me to please you, Your Majesty," I replied. "And would it please you just as much to be the king's mistress?" he asked. There was no mistaking his meaning, and I had long prepared myself for such an interview. I knew well that there were two types of mistresses. First was the courtly mistress to whom romantic poems were addressed. Second was the other type of mistress, a lover. I understood that King Henry spoke of the latter kind. I also understood that should I yield, I would immediately lose my advantage. I knew well what became of the king's former mistresses. When he tired of them, as he always did, they were discarded. I was certain that many ladies had been approached in this manner by the king. I doubted that any of them had had the will to refuse. Who would have dared? I did. I dared because I wanted so much more from King Henry. I wanted the love of his heart and his soul. which I knew would be much harder to win. "My lord, give me time to think on it," I said. Months passed, and the king continued his relentless pursuit. My sister, who was also a member of the royal court, informed me of some very interesting gossip. She claimed that the king was planning to put aside Queen Catherine and take a new wife. The queen had not been successful in providing him with a male heir, and so he needed a younger wife who could provide him with the son he so desired. Until now, I had hoped only to win the king's heartfelt love and devotion. But now, with luck and cleverness, I would cause the king to fall so deeply in love with me that he would not rest until he possessed me. But not as his mistress. No, I would become his wife. Throughout the months that followed, talk of his separation from Catherine never failed to excite the king. At times he was jubilant, but mostly he was impatient. I recognized that my position was very dangerous. There was still no marriage proposal. With one slight miscalculation or one stroke of ill luck, everything would come to ruin. One evening, the king came to my apartments, as he often did. However, he seemed far more agitated than usual. He paced the room for over an hour as I tried to conceal my own growing impatience. Suddenly, he stopped his pacing and gazed at me. "My dearest Anne, promise me that you will be my wife," he cried. I caught my breath. "Unworthy as I am, your majesty, I could ask for nothing more than to be your devoted wife." We knelt together as he lined my face with adoring kisses. For much time, the situation continued to drag on unresolved. The king was still not rid of Catherine, and until he was, we could not marry. I realized that I must be the one to speed up the process. If I conceived the king's child, he would surely take the final steps to rid himself of Catherine and marry me. Soon, I began to observe the telltale signs within my body. I prayed fervently that I was not mistaken. Then, at the new year of 1533, I gave the king the greatest gift he could imagine. I leaned over and whispered in his ear, "My love, I am carrying your child." Then the king bowed his head and wept for joy. On January 25th of that year, we were secretly married, in order to ensure that our child would be considered legitimate and thus heir to the throne. This was hardly the type of wedding I had imagined, but secrecy was still necessary, as he was not wholly rid of Catherine. I had gambled, and I had won. I was married to the King of England and was pregnant with his child. 7 weeks later, our marriage was made public, and I was crowned Queen Anne of England. Now, I had only to await the birth of the prince to accomplish all that I had set out to do. At last, the heir to the throne of England came into the world. I realized that all those around me were silent. "Why are there no cheers for the future King of England?" I cried. The physician looked at me with pity in his eyes. "Madame, the child is a girl." My heart sunk. I feared that the king would not forgive me of this fault. In early spring, my prayers were answered. I conceived another child. My confidence returned as I was sure that I would soon provide the king with a son. And then the unthinkable occurred. I awoke to find myself covered in blood. The physician later informed me that the child had been a boy. I knew that Henry's forgiveness would not be won so easily this time. I had no need to be told what everyone was saying, that my marriage to the king was over, and he would cast me aside as he had once cast aside Catherine. I was informed that the king had ordered an investigation of treason against me. Hours later, I was arrested by order of the king. I was accused and convicted of committing adultery with 5 different men. I was charged with treason against the king and monarchy. And so my story ends. Today I will be executed. I will once again swear that I have never been unloyal to the king. Perhaps I should now confess that I understand that my greatest sin was pride. I asked for too much, reached too high. When I die today, it will not be as a lowborn lady, but the noble Queen Anne. If I must die, then I will die boldly as I have lived. God save the Queen.